Hello everyone, welcome back to Just My Stupid Opinion, and today we're going to be talking about the recent updates to the SNC Lavalin case, because a few days ago, Jody Wilson-Raybould gave her testimony in front of the Justice Committee, and there were a lot of bombshells that were in it. And I'm glad that she ended up doing this, considering what we found out about how the chair of the Justice Committee had put out some statements which made it very curious as to whether this was going to be done in a fair way. Now, I've clipped what her testimony down to its most relevant parts, because the original testimony itself was like 3 hours, and we're not going to sit through 3 hours of that. So we're going to take a look into what she ends up saying, the key parts about the people who are implicated in this, which includes Trudeau, Gerald Butts, Bill Morneau, pretty much a lot of the key players that are inside the Trudeau government, or at least were up until recently, considering that Jerry Butts resigned. But let's get into it. So I'm just going to say that the subtitles that are here, you can ignore them. They were just for my own reference purposes, though they really don't hold much merit into what we're going to see. But let's get into it.
Ben Chin, Minister Morneau's chief of staff, emailed my chief of staff, and they arranged to talk. He wanted to talk about SNC and what we could do, if anything, to address this. He said to her, my chief, that if they don't get a DPA, they will leave Montreal, and it's the Quebec election right now, so we can't have that happen. He said that they have a big meeting coming up on Tuesday, and that this bad news may go public.
So right there, we can already see how this was always about more than just trying to save the jobs. This is something that Trudeau tried to bring up. In fact, Trudeau's story has changed enough times, but the main one he stuck to is, we're trying to save the jobs in Quebec, even though they didn't really seem to care about a lot of the other jobs that have been lost due to the actions of the Trudeau government. But right here, we're seeing how it's about the Trudeau government's future more than anything else. And I actually think there's more to this, which I will touch on once we're through this segment, through all the speeches. But it already kills the Trudeau government's narrative as to why they want a deferred prosecution agreement for SNC Lavalin. But moving on.
This same day, September 17th, I have my one-on-one meeting with the Prime Minister that I requested a couple of weeks ago. When I walked in, the clerk of the Privy Council was in attendance as well. While the meeting was not about the issue of SNC and DPAs, the Prime Minister raised the issue immediately. The Prime Minister asked me to help out, to find a solution here for SNC, citing that if there is no DPA, there would be many jobs lost and that SNC would move from Montreal. In response, I explained to him the law and what I have the ability to do and not do under the Director of Public Prosecutions Act around issuing directives or assuming conduct of prosecutions. I told him that I had done my due diligence and had made up my mind on SNC, and that I was not going to interfere with the decision of the Director. In response, the Prime Minister reiterated his concerns. I then explained how this came about, and that I had received a Section 13 note from the DPP earlier in September, and that I had considered the matter very closely. I further stated that I was very clear on my role as the Attorney General, and that I am not prepared to issue a directive in this case, that it would not be appropriate. The Prime Minister again cited the potential loss of jobs and SNC moving. Then, to my surprise, the clerk started to make the case for the need for a DPA. He said, quote, "There is a board meeting on Thursday, September the 20th, with stockholders," end quote. Quote again, "They will likely be moving to London if this happens, and there is an election in Quebec soon," end quote. At that point, the Prime Minister jumped in, stressing that there is an election in Quebec, and that, quote, "I am an MP in Quebec, the member for Papineau," end quote. I was quite taken aback. My response, and I vividly remember this as well, was to ask the Prime Minister a direct question while looking him in the eye. I asked, quote, "Are you politically interfering with my role, my decision as the Attorney General? I would strongly advise against it," end quote. The Prime Minister said, no, we just need to find a solution. The clerk then said that he spoke to my deputy, and she said that I could speak to the director. I responded by saying no, I would not. That would be inappropriate.
So, first of all, the clerk that she's talking about, the clerk of the Privy Council, this is Michael Wernick, the one who just a few days before Jody Wilson-Raybould gave his testimony in front of the Justice Committee and tries to deflect it with such BS, talking about how he fears for this coming election that someone's going to get assassinated, and then he brings up about how the Conservative MP was talking during the United We Roll rally that took place a week or two ago here in Ottawa. He was talking about how because one of the Conservative MPs brings up, roll over the Liberals, even though I'm pretty sure it's clear that he meant that in a very specific way, not to literally telling the roll over the Liberals, but roll over the Liberal policy. But he's trying to deflect from what's really going on by bringing up this whole idea about assassinations, but he's also completely leaving out about the Liberal MP who ended up bringing up that maybe we should whack Doug Ford, so that doesn't seem to be very much concern to him. But right there, the fact that Trudeau brought up the fact that he's an MP for Papineau says it all. It just proves once again that it is more about Trudeau getting reelected, and it's more about him standing up for his friends. Because we're going to see how SNC Lavalin has direct connection to Justin Trudeau.
On October the 26th, 2018, when my chief of staff spoke to Mathieu Bouchard and communicated to him now that given that SNC has now filed in federal court seeking to review the DPP's decision, surely we had moved past the idea of the Attorney General intervening or getting an opinion on the same question. Mathieu replied that he was still interested in an external legal opinion idea. Could she not get an external legal opinion on whether the DPP had exercised their discretion properly? And then, on the application itself, the Attorney General could intervene, seek to stay the proceedings, given that she was awaiting a legal opinion. My chief of staff said that this would obviously be perceived as interference and her boss questioning the DPP's decision. Mathieu said that if, 6 months from the election, SNC announces they're moving their headquarters out of Canada, that is bad. He said, quote, we can have the best policy in the world, but we need to get reelected, end quote.
The cherry on top of the cake. Just the fact that he says that proves the reality. Now, just to recap, we have interference by Bill Morneau and his staff. We have interference by the clerk of the Privy Council and the Prime Minister. And we have interference by the Prime Minister's office. So there we have about 4 different interferences right now already when it comes to SNC Lavalin. But we still have more.
On December 18th of 2018, my chief of staff was urgently summoned to a meeting with Jerry Butts and Katie Telford to discuss SNC. They wanted to know where I am at in terms of finding a solution. They told her that they felt like the issue was getting worse and that I was not doing anything. They referenced a possible call with the Prime Minister and the clerk the next day. I will now read to you a transcript of the most relevant sections of a text conversation between my chief of staff and I almost immediately after that meeting. Jessica. Basically, they want a solution, nothing new. They want external counsel retained to give you an opinion on whether you can review the DPP's decision here and whether you should in this case. I told them that would be interference. Jerry said, quote, Jess, there is no solution here that does not involve some interference, end quote. At least they are finally being honest about what they are asking you to do. Don't care about the PPSC's independence. Katie was like, quote, we don't want to debate legalities anymore, end quote.
And just remember that Trudeau was the one who said that when to his caucus that when it comes from either Jerry Butts or Katie Telford, it might as well have come from the mouth of the Prime Minister. Now, I get the feeling that those are words that he's going to have to die on considering how Gerald Butts full out came out and said that there is no solution without at least some interference. Might as well have come from the Prime Minister's mouth himself. And Jerry Butts is going to appear in front of the Justice Committee sometime soon. He's already sent a letter to them and said that he wants to do it. He just needs some time to seek legal advice and collect evidence before he gives his testimony. So we'll end up seeing what comes out of that.
On January the 7th, I received a call from the Prime Minister and was informed I was being shuffled out of my role as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. I will not go into details of this call or subsequent communications about the shuffle, but I will say that I stated I believe the reason was because of the SNC matter. They denied this to be the case. On January the 11th, 2019, the Friday before the shuffle, my former Deputy Minister is called by the clerk and told that the shuffle is happening and that she will be getting a new minister. As part of this conversation, the clerk tells the deputy that one of the first conversations that the new minister will be expected to have with the Prime Minister will be on SNC Lavalin.
So that's the end of her testimony that she ends up giving, but it says a lot right there. It says a lot because it just proves everything that we've been suspicious about. And because of this reason, a lot more Canadians than they were before are now calling for an investigation into investigation into the whole situation. They're calling for an investigation into the whole situation, but they want the RCMP to do it now because they believe that there's enough evidence to prove that there was interference by the Prime Minister and his office. And I think there is enough to prove that as well. Now, the thing is Jody Wilson-Raybould was, as Trudeau put it, he waived her right to the attorney-client privilege, allowing her to speak on this. Now, that's not entirely true. What he ended up doing is he waived some of her attorney-client privileges. As we see here, this is from Spencer Fernando. It says, Jody Wilson-Raybould says constraints imposed by Trudeau's Prime Minister's office prevent her from being able to speak freely in upcoming Justice Committee testimony. Now, what it was specifically, he says down here, is, it says, in her letter, I believe this was to the Justice Committee, Wilson-Raybould referenced the order in council that the media claims would free her to speak freely. Quote, the order in council addresses only my time as Attorney General of Canada and therefore does nothing to release me from any restrictions that apply to communications while I serve as Minister of Veterans Affairs and in relation to my resignation from that post or my presentation to Cabinet after I had resigned. I mention this simply to alert the committee of the fact that the order in council leaves in place whatever restraints there are on my ability to speak freely about matters that occurred after I left the post as Attorney General. And this was made pretty clear after that last statement that we saw. She pretty much says in her testimony that this is where I have to stop. I cannot give any more testimony, even though there's more to this case. And it's quite clear that this was the reason she was moved out of her cabinet position, simply because of the fact that the new Attorney General and Minister of Justice, one of the first acts that he did was saying that he would most likely try and get a deferred prosecution agreement for SNC Lavalin. Now, not only is it Canadians calling for the investigation of the matter by RCMP, but 5 former Attorney Generals asked RCMP to investigate alleged interference from the Prime Minister's office. The letter was signed by Peter MacKay, Justice Minister under Stephen Harper from 2013 to 2015, Douglas Grinsley Lewis, Attorney General from 1989 to 1990, Jonathan Dennis, Alberta Justice Minister from 2012 to 2015, Cecil Clark, Nova Scotia Attorney General from 2007 to 2009, and Colin Gabelman, Attorney General of British Columbia from 1991 to 1995. Now, sure, 4 out of these 5 Attorney Generals are, in fact, conservative. But I think it says a lot when you have 5 former Attorney Generals that are calling on an investigation into this situation simply because of what has been said about Jody Wilson-Raybould's testimony. I mean, this only came out on February 28th, 2019. This was well after she ended up... that she gave her testimony. And there's more. There's still more that goes on. Because Pierre Poilievre was trying to get to the bottom of this matter during a financial committee, when it turns out that he ended up getting the chair of the financial committee ended up shutting down the committee while he was trying to get some answers, and we just have this here.
You have 7 minutes.
Yes, according to public records, the Minister of Finance met with SNC Lavalin representatives after the... Actually, Mr. Chair, we are. I'm afraid, sorry to disappoint you, but we are getting into it. And I know you want to cover it up, but you're not going to cover it up.
Do you want to...
Actually,
pull a mic.
I have a button here, and you're not going to silence me. My job is to defend the accountability of Parliament. I am not going to be silenced by you or anyone else. You might have silenced Jody Wilson-Raybould, but you're not going to silence me.
Mr. Poilievre,
Mr. Liberal Chair, I do have the chair, Mr. Liberal Chair. Mr. Liberal Chair, I do have the floor, and I invite the parliamentary secretary to...
Get a technician in here to pull that mic at point of order, and then Mr. Massey, point of order.
Ironic, isn't it, that Mr. Sorbera only wants to talk about the tax treaty now? Because a moment ago, he talked about numerous subjects that aren't in the treaty. He talked about unrelated tax policies. He talked about infrastructure projects. He talked about child benefits. He talked about a tax credit for workers. He talked about the small business tax rate. None of those things are in the treaty. And yet, Mr. Chair, you allowed them to be discussed without interruption. So it is very interesting that all of a sudden, now that the subject has become unfavorable to your party, you have slammed your gavel and behaved in a way that helps protect the Prime Minister's office.
What's your point of order?
My point is, if they can talk about things not in the treaty, I can talk about things not in the treaty.
The floor is yours, and if we can stick to that, it'll be great.
Well, the government and the committee are of the view that deferred prosecution agreements are a matter for this committee. That's why they put them in the budget, and that's why this committee was responsible for approving it. So we are on topic. The question I have here is, what was the purpose of the minister meeting with SNC Lavalin when he did so? Actually, it's in order because it's my time, and I will ask the questions I choose to ask. I will ask the questions that I choose to ask. Actually, sorry, I have point of order.
No, he has a point.
I'm afraid, Mr. Chair, you're mistaken. I have the floor.
No,
I have a point of order, and my point of order. I have the floor.
Can you cut his mic?
The point of my intervention is this: the government has said that this is a finance. That's why they put it in the budget, and therefore it is the job of the Finance Committee to ask questions of the Finance Minister in relation to his interventions on the matter.
Meeting suspended.
I am asking.
I suspend the meeting.
There you go.
We're not going to have...
So Pierre Poilievre wasn't even allowed to ask the simple questions, and he had every right to do this, because don't forget, it was, as he stated in there, it was in the budget where this new way of prosecution, the deferred prosecution agreement, came in. It was underneath the 2018 budget, so he has every reason in that committee in order to bring that up, but he ended up getting shut down. And we already found out that from a CTV interview that people on the Hill, Parliament Hill, were calling what Bill Morneau did in the 2018 budget the SNC law, because it was specifically tailored in order to get them out of trouble from being in the face of prosecution and for the possibility of having to pay huge amounts in fines. So from one committee to the next, from one part of government to the next, there is an active cover-up as what's going on in here. Now, before we get into why that is the case, there's one more thing, is that Andrew Scheer called for the resignation of Justin Trudeau. He called for the resignation because after Jody Wilson-Raybould gave her testimony, he felt that it showed enough bad light in order to have the Prime Minister step down. And don't forget again that in episode 91, when we were first going over what's going on in SNC Lavalin, we found out that from a CPAC interview that this is exactly the type of scandals that bring down government. Now, Justin Trudeau has once again denied everything, but the thing is his story changes. Time and time again, his story is changing. First, he says he did nothing wrong. Then he says, oh, we didn't do anything illegal. And then he's trying to say, oh, we were doing to try and save jobs in Quebec. Well, SNC Lavalin doesn't really employ that many people in Quebec. They employ about 50,000 employees worldwide, but it's only about 3,800 people in Quebec that they actually employ. So this says a lot. But there's more going on here. Why has the Trudeau government tried to cover this up so badly? Two reasons for that. Two very specific reasons. Where is it? Here we go. So, I guess you're seeing it right now. I didn't realize I changed over the screen already. All right, so anyway, what we're seeing here is from Mr. Frank McVitie, and as he shows here, he shows a connection from SNC Lavalin going all the way back to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So what we have here is the CEO and president of SNC Lavalin, Bruce Neal. Bruce Neal is married to a woman named Emma Griffin. And Emma Griffin she's done a lot of different types of work, but one thing that she has done, which I'm going to pull up because I wrote a piece about this, so I can actually get you the exact information that I'm looking for, is Emma Griffin has worked in all different types of fields, but mostly her focus has been on corporate finances. So this is mine. There we go. So what you're seeing here is part of her LinkedIn profile. And what it says is is that she works for Claridge. Now, what is Claridge? Claridge, as I stated down here, Claridge is a private investment firm that manages Charles Bronfman's wealth and that represents the interests of the Stephen Bronfman family. And I already did, for those who ended up seeing, I think it was episode 79, which ended up getting banned worldwide. I was talking about the Bronfman family. It was my very first episode of Know Your Owners. And you can also go find it on BitChute. I think what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to re-upload it. I'm just going to edit out the part that got it banned worldwide, which was a BS ban, if you ask me. But it is what it is. So, Bronfman family has been for a long time, has been one of these Canadian families that are pulling the strings behind the scenes. In fact, they've been called the Rothschilds of the New World because it was Samuel Bronfman, who was the first patriarch of the Bronfman family. When he came to Canada, he had connections leading back to the Rothschilds. And because of this, he just amassed a shit ton of wealth for no reason. They say it was because of the Seagram fortune, but that could not be further from the truth. He also had involvement in American Prohibition. He was one of the people that was transporting the alcohol across American borders. He was in cahoots with Jewish mafia members and Italian mafia members. In fact, Al Capone was one of these people that he was involved with. They branched out into prostitution and even some racketeering. The Bronfmans are a terrible family, but the Stephen Bronfman has been one of the largest liberal fundraisers of all time and a close friend of Justin Trudeau. So we can see how this connection goes all the way back to Justin Trudeau himself about why they would have this connection, but it goes even further than that. Because Jacques Bougie sits on the board of SNC Lavalin. He's the chief of governance and ethics committee for SNC Lavalin. He is also a mentor on the Trudeau Foundation. Now, how could you get, that is the clearest sign that there is collusion going on here. The Trudeau government is doing what they're doing because they're trying to look after their friends. That's exactly the reason why. Well, there's a few different reasons. They're trying to look after their friends. They're trying to get reelected. And if SNC Lavalin was to leave Quebec, then this would be terrible for the Trudeau government because Quebec has for a long time been a liberal stronghold. And now the Conservatives are trying to they are making inroads there. But they're also protecting their own money. And what do I mean by that? I turn now to this. The Caisse de dépôt Actually, we'll go here first. The Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec, which is also the Quebec Deposit and Investment Fund, is an institutional investor that manages several public and parapublic pension plans and insurance programs in Quebec. It is the second largest pension fund in Canada after the Canada Pension Plan. Why is this important? It's important because, as we can see here, from the Montreal Gazette, Caisse de dépôt will be a rock for SNC Lavalin CEO Sabia says. The Caisse is SNC Lavalin's largest shareholder, holding around 20% of the company's shares. So they have an investment in that, but the Caisse de dépôt handles the Quebec Pension Plan. They handle the Quebec Pension Plan, and guess where a lot of MPs' pensions go through. If it's not going through the Canadian Pension Plan, if they're from Quebec, it's going through the Quebec Pension Plan. And I actually forgot to pull it up right here. But as we can see, I actually pulled it up on my phone, so maybe I can get you guys to see this. So coordinating the members of Parliament pension plan with the Canada Pension Plan or the Quebec Pension Plan. So they are protecting their own money because of this. Because with the Caisse de dépôt being the largest shareholder in SNC Lavalin, that means if the SNC Lavalin stocks plummet, which they have been doing since even before the start of this whole situation, it's actually kind of interesting because I ended up looking into something. Oop, shit. Anyway, sorry. I ended up looking into something a few days ago where I was looking into the stock prices of SNC Lavalin, and as it turns out, interesting enough, that the stock prices of SNC Lavalin had actually been dropping since about the 25th of there we go. Now you can see it better. The 25th of January, all the way to the 28th, as you can see here, there was a large plummet in their stock, and their stock has never really recovered. We can see that sort of here at the end, which was probably about late February, maybe 1st of March, that there was a little bit of recovery, but not even close to what we've actually seen. So, with their investments inside of SNC Lavalin, if the SNC Lavalin stock drops, then a lot of that pension money is being invested into that stock, meaning that they will lose that money simply because of that reason. So what they're doing right now has more to do with they are worried about the upcoming election because this is going to hit them hard in the upcoming election. And with Quebec being a liberal stronghold, we know the CAQ took over the provincial government there, which is a right-wing party, something that hasn't been seen in something like 40 years, a right-wing party leading the Quebec province. So they're losing there. Conservatives are making inroads there, which means the Liberals are losing their stronghold. And we see how they got demolished when it came to Ontario. The West isn't going to vote for them, and now if Ontario continues the same route that it did last year, in last year's election, the 2018 provincial election, then that's going to go to the Conservatives, and then that means Quebec is the last stronghold that they have in order to maintain power, and if they lose that to the Conservatives, they're out of power. They also Trudeau's trying to look after his own friends because we can see the connection of SNC Lavalin both through the Bronfmans and through that one member who is involved in, including that one member involved with both SNC Lavalin and Trudeau Foundation, Jacques Bouchy. We can see how he's doing it for that reason, and they're trying to protect their own pension money. Because if that gets invested, that gets lost, they don't get it at the end of the day. So this is why the Trudeau government is doing what they're doing, and it makes absolute sense now. All the involvement, all the pressure on Jody Wilson-Raybould, all of the attempts to interfere with a court case, which is some of the biggest taboos that you can do inside a government, is try and interfere in the judicial process. All has to do with the election, their friends, and protecting their own money. This is the situation that we're in now. This is the situation that the Trudeau government has found themselves in. It all makes sense, and because of this, it makes me feel that a investigation into what happened on Parliament Hill by the RCMP is necessary. But one of the main reasons that the Trudeau government doesn't want to do it is because they're guilty. This seems quite clear that they tried to interfere inside of the judicial process, and in doing so, people could possibly go to prison over it. And you know what? I think somebody has to go to prison over it. It is the biggest scandal we've seen in Canadian government in a long frickin' time. And somebody needs to pay for it. Thank you for tuning into the podcast today. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion.